Hello, everyone. Welcome to Life Edge. And that is because everybody needs an edge, and why be mediocre? So, our goal is to find intriguing guests who have things to share with us that give us an edge in life and make us feel excited and enthusiastic. And I'm really glad that our guest today fits that profile perfectly. His name is Dr. Brian Matthews, and he is from Texas A&M, Texarkana. And he will be talking to us today about his very interesting research that he's doing in the College of Business, Engineering, and Technology. Welcome.
Hello, Susan. How are you?
Hello and welcome.
Hello, Susan. How are you?
Good. So tell us about your research. You had a wonderful presentation, and you might give us a little summary of what you talked about before, and then talk about what you'd like to share with us about what you've found recently in terms of management and motivation and all the different things that you do and leadership theories.
Yeah, absolutely. I know the last time that we spoke about leadership, we touched on very briefly the topic of motivation, what entices, what provokes, what stimulates action, what stimulates work activity to produce a certain level of achievement. And so one of the things that I became interested in teaching principles of management as we talk about leadership and management, and more specifically, we talk about motivating employees. I became intrigued about the proverbial carrot or carrots that entices an individual to perform at a certain level to produce a desired outcome, and then how those outcomes are related to individual and organizational goals. So just to give you a little bit of an anecdotal background. Obviously, there are certain relationships as it relates to performance and satisfaction, or satisfaction and performance, and how those are inclusive and exclusive of each other. There is research that determines that satisfaction does have a direct effect on performance, and performance has a direct effect on satisfaction. And there is also, in one particular study, there is a postulation that neither variable has an effect on the other. And so
Wow.
one professor and I, we actually looked at, actually it was two other professors and myself, we looked to see if there was an existing precursor to the readiness, I'm sorry, to the performance and satisfaction um, dyad. And so one of the things that we found in our research is that there is definitely a precursor or a preceding relationship to satisfaction and performance, and that's the relationship of readiness and satisfaction. So, in brevity, the more ready or the more willing and able an employee is, the more that individual is going to be satisfied with their job. The more satisfied they are, the better they're going to perform. And so we linked, or we found a correlation between those two relationships. And so in the presentation that I want to share with you today, we not only took the succeeding relationship as far as readiness and satisfaction, and the satisfaction and performance relationship, but then we also looked at performance and achievement. So now you have three different relationships. So you have one being readiness and satisfaction, the other relationship being satisfaction and performance. I'm sorry, satisfaction and performance, and then performance and achievement. So what that conclusion is, the more ready an individual is, then the better or the more they're going to be satisfied. The more satisfied they are, the better they're going to perform. And the better they perform, the more they're going to achieve. And
That's a
basically,
great reinforcing loop. Yeah.
yeah,
It
and
seems like
so
that's a really
and
good,
so
reinforcing loop.
Yes, ma'am. And so we also wanted to see what mediating or what umpiring factor would have some type of a direct effect on all three of those relationships. And one of the mediating factors that we wanted to look at was motivation. And
Mm.
in that, as you'll see on the PowerPoint, if we can actually reference that, once we look at what motivation is, motivation is basically defined as, you know, any type of process, any type of course, any type of implementation that accounts for an individual's intensity, or in other words, their energy that they give toward a certain um, work effort, as it also relates to their direction or whatever course or whatever path or whatever, you know, repetitious practices that they exercise or that they implement, and then also the persistence, the level of continuity, the level of persistence, the level of persevering toward a certain goal, in the effort to attain or to accomplish a certain goal. So whenever you look at motivations, you look at different incentives. You know, what incentivizes an individual, what um, triggers, what provokes, what induces, what persuades an individual to pursue a certain goal. Or another axiom for that, or another saying for that, what is the proverbial carrot that causes an individual to go toward or pursue or to seek a certain goal? And so, whenever you look at motivation as it relates to those three relationships that we aforementioned, we ascertain that there is theoretically a cyclical effect that takes place. So, again, to revisit those three relationships, the more ready an employee is, the more they're going to be satisfied. The more satisfied they are, the better they're going to perform. And the better they perform, the more they're going to achieve, or the level that they perceive they need to perform at, the higher they're going to um, put forth effort to accomplish a goal. And then what happens is motivation causes there to be a cyclical effect, because the more I achieve, then the more I learn, the more knowledgeable I become based on the feedback of the outcome, then the more ready I am. The more ready I am, the more satisfied I am. The more satisfied I am, the better I perform. The better I perform, the more I achieve. And so when we looked at motivation being this umpiring factor, what we did was, in order to provide some layers to this um, theoretical concept, we actually overlapped different motivational theories. And so the first one that we looked at was Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And so we know that in those needs, there's actually 5 layers to the pyramid. And basically, with Maslow's hierarchy of needs, Maslow avowed that an individual will start with external needs first, or lower order needs, and then they will matriculate through this needs hierarchy until they reach self actualization. In other words, an individual would not seek to belong to a group or to be a part of a social construct until they have food, clothes, and shelter. So until they have the basic needs, those physiological needs, and those needs are met substantially, then they will migrate to the next level or to the next, which are safety needs, and then that will become the most dominant need. And then when those safety needs are met substantially, and operatively, they need to be met substantially, not 100%, but they just need to be met enough to um, to make the next level more dominant and more prevalent. And so not only do we look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and again, you're dealing with your lower order needs, or those are more external needs, and your higher order needs, or your more internal or your intrinsic needs. And so then what we did was, if you go to the next slide, we we developed this hypothesis as it relates to the 3 relationships that I mentioned earlier. So again, readiness and satisfaction, satisfaction performance, and then performance achievement. And then as you see in the diagram, motivation actually exists in all three relationships. And then you see at the end of achievement, the performance achievement relationship, then it actually ties back to readiness satisfaction. So you see this cyclical effect that takes place. And so what we wanted to test is that as motivation increases among one or more of those relationships, you're going to continue to see this cyclical effect that takes place. The other hypothesis that we looked at is if motivation decreases in one or more of those relational dyads, then you're going to see the cyclical effect actually protract and maybe eventually stop. And then the other hypothesis that we wanted to test is motivation has no effect on any of the three relationships. And so whenever we look at motivation, and I think what motivates us as employees is very fascinating. Even as you look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs and you look at low order needs, which are your external or your intrinsic needs, and then your higher order needs, which are more internal or your intrinsic needs. We also looked at, if you go to the next slide, we looked at Herzberg's two-factor theory. And this theory is interesting because it deals with internal and external needs. In Herzberg's two-factor theory, or it's called a motivational or hygiene theory, your motivators are more internal. So they deal more with job satisfaction. Your hygiene factors or your external or extrinsic needs, they deal more or they're associated more with job dissatisfaction. So whenever we look at the traditional view perspective of job satisfaction, it's mainly how you feel about your job. What is your attitude towards your job? And we as humans, we are creatures of balance. So we need this disequilibrium causes us discomfort. So our attitudes, which is a combination of what we think and how we feel, it dictates our behavior. So it's almost a unidirectional equation that what I think about my job plus how I feel about my job, which equates to my attitude toward my job, engenders or it influences how I behave, or that behavior being, am I satisfied or dissatisfied? So if you look at this illustration on the slide, you actually see a green arrow and you see a yellow arrow. And on the yellow arrow, those are your hygiene factors, or those are more internal, I'm sorry, those are more external or extrinsic. And then on the left-hand side, you see a green arrow, and those are your motivators, or those are your intrinsic factors. So Herzberg had this imaginative viewpoint of job dissatisfaction and satisfaction in suggesting that the way to look at job satisfaction is not traditional, that an individual can be dissatisfied and satisfied at the same time, or there can be an absence of dissatisfaction or the presence of dissatisfaction, and there could be the presence of job satisfaction or no job satisfaction. For example, if Susan, you and I are teaching, here at A&M,
Yeah.
and you and I may not have a good relationship with Dr. Static. That's more of a external or a hygiene factor that exists. But we actually love what we do as professors. So we love the work itself. We love coming to teach. We love researching. We love conveying theoretical and conceptual information to our students. So that's more internal. So we're satisfied with the work itself, but we're dissatisfied with the relationship with our boss or with our supervisor.
That makes a
Another
lot of
example
sense.
is I may be or I may be dissatisfied with the obstruction of growth on my job, but there's no dissatisfaction with my peers. And so Herzberg deduced that there can be a combination of job satisfaction and job dissatisfaction, and those exist simultaneously. And so next, what we looked at, in addition to Maslow's hierarchy of needs and Herzberg's two-factor theory, is that we looked at Vroom's expectancy theory. And on this slide, you'll see that there are three junctures of connectivity in this progression of accomplishing a goal. So first, you have your expectancy factor, which basically is the probability that is perceived by an individual that if they exert a certain amount of energy, they're going to perform at a certain level. So if I'm a student taking a class, then I feel that the more I study, the more I go to class, the more I read, the more I research, I'm going to perform at a certain level. Okay, I'm going to produce a certain outcome, or I'm going to produce a certain activity as it relates to the effort that I put forth. Instrumentality is the belief that if I perform at a certain level, then I'm going to achieve a specific outcome. So going back to the expectancy, if I study, if I go to the library, if I forego socializing with friends, if I go to my professor after class to get a better understanding of the material that was taught in class, there's a probability that I'm going to receive an A on an exam. That's the instrumentality.
So this is like, okay, so the expectancy is like, that's Vroom. Is that the Vroom expectancy theory?
Yes.
Okay, good.
Yes, and so as I put forth the effort as it relates to intensity, direction, and perseverance, I feel like, or I perceive, or there's a propensity for me to perform at a certain level. And I believe that performing at that certain level as it relates to the valence or the attractiveness of the goal, whatever that goal is, then I'm going to receive or be the recipient or the beneficiary of whatever the goal is based on my level of performance, which is produced by the effort that I put forward. So on the next slide, you'll actually see this chart that shows motivation in blue, in this blue jagged line that goes across this chart. And then you'll see the relationships and how they're affected in orange. So this is the relationship between readiness, satisfaction, performance, and achievement. So the proverbial carrot has to be quite extensive in order to have an impact on all three relationships or one or more of those relationships. And so if you look on the next slide, you'll actually see this cyclical effect illustrated, which actually proves both hypotheses that we tested, that as long as motivation is a mediating factor in one or more of those relationships, then that cyclical effect is going to continue to increase. But as soon as motivation ceases, or there is nothing that induces me or stimulates me or entices me or provokes my drive, my energy in a certain direction, that means the practices or the trends that were implemented to pursue a goal, they're going to decrease or they're going to diminish. And then that cyclical effect decreases or it eventually stops. And so one of the things that we concluded is that, we as managers have to find, or we as leaders have to find what motivates our employees, because what motivates you may not motivate me. You may be more externally motivated, while I may be more internally motivated. You may be more motivated by salary, where I may be motivated by advancement and by growth and by recognition and by advancement. And so that was just a fascinating finding that we
Relationships.
discovered in our research.
Well, that was really interesting what you're saying, Brian, and I really like the points about how intrinsic motivators tie into your basic needs as well. So like in the example of like, you might be in a situation that has a mixture of like bad hygiene, like in terms of like the technical term, not that somebody's hands are dirty, but like,
right.
like they don't like their boss or something like that. And so they don't like the boss, or the boss is mean, but they like the people they work with, and they like the work itself.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I think whenever the list was enumerated as it relates to those things that attributed to job dissatisfaction, they were all external elements. So whenever you really dissect Herzberg's two-factor theory and you look at your hygiene factors and your motivators, or your satisfiers and your dissatisfiers, your hygiene factors are all external. They're all environmental. So looking at your motivators or your satisfiers, they're all internal. So where your hygiene factors are contextual, your motivators associate with content. So they associate with the crux or the essence of the person, where your hygiene factors are relative to the environment by which the person works in. And so when you look at that type of dynamic, between those two, then one can easily understand that even though I may be in a hostile environment, I still may be satisfied with my job. I may not like the work conditions, which are external. So I may be dissatisfied with the environment by which I work in because I don't feel safe. However, I'm satisfied with being a social worker, even though I may not like going into some of the homes, because going in some homes are dangerous. Walking into someone's yard before I go into their home is dangerous. But I like the significance that my job has on someone's life, and so this is just an illustrative description to be better able to add clarity to a non-traditional view of being satisfied and being dissatisfied.
That makes sense. I like that.
And so in investigating the impact or the causal effect of motivation, we try to uncover, what effect motivation would have on this preceding relationship to performance and satisfaction. And we found that in readiness and satisfaction. And even as it relates to readiness, we as leaders have to understand that we have to adapt to the people that follow us to a degree, because every individual is not of the same caliber. Not to minimize our followers, because in order for us to be leaders, we have to have followers. But all of our followers may be at a different readiness level, meaning that you have some individuals that are not only unable, but they're unwilling. You have some individuals that are willing and not able. You have others that are able and unwilling. And then you have the ideal or the consummate employee that is both willing and able, which means that we as leaders have to be adaptive and situational in our leadership. And so we have to wear different leadership hats. So whether we're more of a telling leader, a selling leader, participating leader, or a delegating leader, we have to shift almost at a moment's notice, or shift instantaneously, or there should be a metamorphosis in our leadership style as it relates to the employees that follow us.
Okay, so I have a scenario for you.
Okay.
Okay, so let's say that you're the manager for Caribou Coffee, and so you go into Caribou Coffee and you've got a horrible problem. It's a Caribou Coffee at the airport, And sometimes there's a lot of people are busy and they're nervous about traveling, and so a lot of times it's really, really busy, and sometimes it's not busy at all, and you're having a really hard time keeping employees. And so you've got employees that have been there for a week. We've got a couple of people who they can't afford to go anyplace else, or they're stuck there, so they don't, even though they don't like it, they're hanging in there, and they've been there for 2 or 3 years. And then you've got some who are just there because it's a job while they're in school. So they tend to be gone. They tend to work and leave at the end of semesters. So how would you keep something like that? What would you say would be typical issues, and how would you keep everybody, or how would you improve performance?
Find out what motivates them.
How would you do
First,
that?
I think, as it relates to the relational connectivity of those three relationships that we looked at in our research, find out if those individuals, I guess, determine where their readiness level is, their willingness and their ability. Because oftentimes you have
Okay.
individuals that have the willingness, they have the desire to improve, but there's no training available. So you have individuals that are willing, but they're unable because there may be a lack of training. They may not be in a conducive environment that stimulates learning, that improves skill sets. Find out maybe what they're good at, because I may be a productive person, but I may be in an unproductive environment. And so
Yeah, but
being
right. That makes sense.
right. And so if I'm in a productive environment, if I'm in a position where I can exercise my intellect and increase my self-efficacy to make decisions, and the more I feel confident in making decisions, in producing outcomes that are relevant, producing outcomes that progress the organization incrementally, then the more you're going to see more organizational commitment behavior, the less you're going to see turnover, the higher the morale is going to be, the less workforce deviance you're going to see. And as it relates to leader-member exchange, if there is more of a transactional exchange within this relationship, it's almost like a parent-child relationship, if you want to think of it more in relative terms. As a parent, we want to ensure that we train or that we raise children that are underdeveloped into mature and responsible and accountable adults. So it's similar to employees. As a leader, I want to make sure that my employees have all of the proper tools, and that they know how to utilize those tools. They know how to, make decisions. They are able to be empowered and to be given this responsibility. Obviously, there has to be a level of trust that is earned in this reciprocal relationship. But theoretically, the more they mature, then the less I'm going to monitor and control their activities. So much
Well,
so to the degree.
here's a wrinkle though. Okay, so let's I like this, but let's apply it to something else too. So yeah, you're talking about performance, and they are maybe feeling good about the people, but some of the best performers are horrible with customers. They just are terrible. How would you tackle that challenge?
I think we as leaders need to be mindful of trends. And I think you're absolutely correct. You have individuals that are good in certain areas and they're not so good in others. So it goes back to the response earlier. Try to insert them and implant them into areas where they thrive. So if I know that
Okay.
there is an individual that is good organizationally and they're good structurally, but they really don't do well in front of people, that individual is probably not going to be a sales manager, because being a sales manager, you are promoting products, services, and mode of operations to individuals. So you teach your subordinates or your followers to have a heart for people, to be able to understand people, to be able to establish a rapport with people, to listen, to fully understand what their needs are, so you can properly convey information that's going to be useful to them so they can make a sound and logical decision. that may not be the best position to place that individual in. So it's about finding out what works for that individual and then placing them in the proper context so they can produce at a higher level.
So if they're at Caribou Coffee, we take them off the cashier and we put them back in making the drinks. Maybe they're really good at.
Absolutely, because you may have that same individual that, and as you mentioned, and I think you use a great example, an individual that is good at making a cup of coffee, they're outstanding, probably the best coffee maker there, in the bistro, but they have poor people skills. And there shouldn't be a halo effect that is used by managers to say, okay, well, if they're good in this area, then we deduce that they must be good in other areas, when that's not the case. And so, we'll find out very quickly from feedback from customers in this example that this individual may not be ideal as being a cashier. So let's put them in an area where they thrive. So we're going to get a good product. We need someone that has great people skills, that is gregarious, that is sociable, that is extroverted. That individual needs to be at the cash register. That individual needs to be establishing the rapport. That individual needs to be building a relationship and then telling the customer, these are the different varieties of coffees that we make. You should try this one. Or if you were here before and tried this one, we have a person in the back that makes this flavor of coffee. How about trying this one? I've tried it before.
Perfect.
I love it. I sold it to customers. They love it. Had nothing but great feedback. That's the person that you need at the cash register. So now you have two individuals that are put in the proper context and they're thriving and they're going to put forth effort with the probability of performing at a higher level. And then performing at a higher level is going to produce, expected results.
Wow, that's really great. This has really been helpful. And are you available for people who might need some coaching, like at their businesses?
Yes, most definitely. We are. In addition to the research that we've currently done, and I know you talked about availability, but just to add a little bit more credibility for the advice to be given as it relates to an individual that wants some insight as far as motivation, as far as rewarding employees, dictating and engendering and influencing behavior by incentivizing and de-incentivizing employees in order to produce the expected behavior that we as managers want. We are also looking at the effect of leadership variation as it relates to leadership styles within the leader-member exchange. So how does the shift in leadership style, how does that affect the exchange between leaders and members? Is the transition in leadership styles, is that a mitigating or an influencing factor as it relates to the evolution of the leader-member relationship? So we're also looking at that. Wow. And as it relates to accessibility, I'm definitely available for anyone that actually wants some advice as it relates to leadership, as it relates to a different type of leader, as it relates to task orientation, relationship orientation, situational leadership, and or motivating employees.
That's perfect. And like change management, things like that with mergers, people having problems motivating people.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's really a challenge too, where you have people who have they're feeling uncertain and nervous, especially if they've had layoffs, and then they don't want to lose their job, but they don't agree with the new culture. So that's always interesting.
Yeah, and culture is a factor that cannot be numerated because it's constantly moving. Based on the people that comprise that culture. You have strong cultures, you have subcultures within the culture, and the commonality of all of the cultures that are amalgamated or that are joined together or propagated together is that all of those cultures, they all have norms. They all have expected rules and regulations as to how individuals govern themselves within that respective culture. The norms, the rules, the regulations, the policies, the procedures within that culture, they're all shared, they're all perceived, and they're all descriptive. Individuals within that culture, they know how to dress, and they dress similarly. They have a common jargon that only individuals within that culture understand. They have different ways of doing things. There is a contextual element and nuance as it relates to culture. And so you're exactly correct. You know, culture is a almost a complex and convoluted, moving and ever shifting dynamic that is constantly influenced by the people within that culture or within
Super
that system.
interesting. Yeah. Well, Dr. Matthews, we're pretty much out of time, but just wanted to thank you for coming back, and this is a fascinating presentation. Yeah, in fact, after we have the YouTube link, I'm going to put it in and to LinkedIn, but also thinking about requiring it for some students in classes. So I think it applies to everybody.
Thank you.
Oh, so I want to wrap up saying that to encourage everyone to like the video and to subscribe and to send the comments. And also we will have information about how to get in touch with Dr. Matthews. You can always get in touch too by just contacting me or the show. So if you need some consulting or would like some insight into a particular problem, pesky little issue that you're having at work, just let us know. So thank you. And thanks again, Dr. Matthews.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you so much for having me. Always a pleasure.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.